Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Design Commission meeting. The time is now 6:01. I now call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency, this meeting of the Urban Design Commission is conducted via remote participation. We will make recordings available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. My name is Courtney Kirk, and I have been designated by co-chair, the Director of Public Space and Urban Forestry, Luisa Oliveira, and I am joined by Rebecca Cooper, who is designated by co-chair Director Lewis to co-chair this meeting tonight. I will start this meeting with a roll call of the voting commission members present tonight. Heidi Cron.
Present.
Deborah Fennick.
Present.
Tim Talon.
Present.
Our first and only matter of business tonight is the design review for 495 Columbia Street, which this is their third appearance before this commission. If the people that are, I assume most of the people in the attendees are here for this project, but if you could please raise your hand, and Rebecca Cooper can make you a presenter, and we can unmute the people representing 495 Columbia Street.
I don't know if you see my hand, but David Enriquez will be presenting.
Great. I think I have everybody unmuted.
Can you turn on cameras also?
Not for attendees.
I think we can make one of the presenters a panelist.
Ah, okay. Go.
Thank you.
David, you are now a panelist. Go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry,
great.
I'll announce you.
Okay, well, yeah.
Before we start, I just want to remind everyone that there were no formal votes taken for 495 Columbia, only informational guidance given to pursue the preferred massing, which was option 1. So now 495 Columbia, please take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks for having us back. We're pretty excited to show you what we've advanced since our last meeting. I think a lot of the comments that you had were on point, well taken, and I think we addressed them head on, and I think came up with some positive moves forward. So I'll just start with kind of what we focused on, what we heard last meeting. You wanted to see how we were going to activate Columbia Street. I think we had shown some sort of ground floor or base level improvements in the last project, but you wanted to see how that was going to sort of activate the street and become part of the life of the street. So we've done that. We also have, I think, improved our rendering of the facade materiality, so you get a better sense of that, sort of what the materials are going to look like in a little bit more photoreal way. The west facade was a point that we thought we could make some real strides on, and I think the notion that this project is going to face the neighborhood and become a really iconic view from the neighborhood was sort of front of mind for us when we went back and tackled that. So we'll show you some of that. And then the public realm. You wanted to see some notion of how we were thinking about the street in total. So Columbia Street activation, this has actually been really foremost in our mind actually during the entire planning process of this project. And this is the sort of the portion of the building along Columbia Street you see here. This is where we've located our two important entrances. I think you'll remember from the last couple of meetings. But this gives you a look at how we're thinking about the inside and how we're thinking about how these lobbies could somehow connect through the building and even to the green space that we've been developing in the center of the site. So, you know, we really think that there's going to be activation, that there's going to be a lot of porosity in the building, both on the exterior and the interior. The active uses are not yet defined in the program, but we really see this entire face of the building from Webster around the corner all the way to our lobby as being a very active area. So this is how we're starting to envision this. This gives you a better sense, I think, of the ideas we had about planting and street furniture, the paving patterns, and now you can see some of the storefronts and the notion of really a lively street activation happening all the way from this corner. This gives you a glimpse down Webster and gives you a sense of some of the fabric of the local neighborhood and how some of the metals and some of the readings in that starts to read into the MR5 building. And then we carry that across towards Boynton Yards. And of course, as we've been talking about, the scale then increases. So we see using similar kinds of metals in the facade, slim kind of modern ideas of how we create store entrances. So we still think that the notion of a traditional feel, but maybe a modern palette is going to carry through to the smaller scale.
Just a clarification, when you say active use, is that intended to be a retail space or part of the building program? Or is that not yet determined?
It's not yet determined. Of course, we have a creative arts use that we need to locate. I don't know if it's going to be there, but that's one possibility for that. So we are thinking about that in the entire scheme of it. Gives you a sense of kind of the finer grain in the canopy. And Columbia Street then. So again, rising in scale, again, still lively. We think that we can take this opportunity in our larger lobby, sort of lobby slash cafe that we're imagining, and maybe open up those walls with some sort of accordion doors or a nano wall, and really allow the street to come into the lobby in that fashion. And this is really exciting to us, and really think this is going to be part of the way that we can increase the activation. The materiality. So, you know, we're still really focused on this idea of the combination of a kind of a textured panel, like a concrete panel or a tactile, in combination with metal frames and curtain wall glass as our palette. So this, you know, this is kind of a snapshot that we've been showing, and I think that we really feel like that expresses the modernity that we want in this building. What we've done in this, which you can see, is there were some comments last time about, I think, creating kind of a greater density in the frame language. So what we've done is that we've within the frames spacings, we've added sort of a half of the larger frame material in the vertical. And we think this creates a little bit more richness in this facade. We feel like it does carry forward some of the aspects of what we were calling option 3 into this, but it doesn't completely change the vocabulary. But we do think it helps us sort of define those side pieces a little bit more as solids, perhaps. And you'll see, I think when we place it against, when you see the straight on view against the MR5, it really starts to separate itself off a little bit more. So this is just a very, very quick snapshot. Nothing different here, just really letting you know where these materials are sitting. We're starting to think about sustainability aspects to the project as well, which you'll see in the west facade study. We're still working on that, but we're excited about sort of thinking about the way not just the form of the building, but maybe the function of the building can start to express its intent and the uniqueness of the project. So, I mean, you'll see here, and you probably see it better in the rendering, but we've started adding in another layer of reading in here, which we think is sort of helps to define this off. What you'll also notice is that we've pulled this solid column right next to the MR5, so that similar kind of standing next to look that we have in these buildings, we've also achieved in this. And it had the further effect actually of sliding over our rhythm, which allowed us to open up this corner as a glass corner, both down at the entrance and along the face of the building. So we feel like it had kind of a nice after effect in terms of the kind of windows and the kind of views we can get from the building. The west facade, if you'll remember, was a very large face. It was somewhat undifferentiated, and it was essentially coplanar from the front to the back of the building. So our approach was to really create what we think is a more explicit hierarchy in the forms, and we're doing that in terms of which planes we advance and which planes we make recede. So you see here we brought the penthouse forward to the face of the building, which is sort of creating a much more significant prow to this moment in the building, which we think is important, as that's kind of the main, the main tower form. We've set back, or kept back rather, in its original position, the mechanical screen wall, and we've lessened both the size of this center portion that was on the core, and we've also started to break up the form in terms of form, but also in terms of thinking about adding texture to this. So we've taken that approach to what we did see is a bit of a flat piece of the project. And as you can see here, you start to read this sort of tripartite idea of how this is working. This part advances. We're thinking about increasing or amplifying the reading of our sort of bay window here by letting it lock into the core wall and break up that form. And then we're also thinking about adding texture in. We're still studying this, but we think it can be either with different textured cement panels, as we were talking. We could talk about increasing the depth even with a different material, but we are studying that. But we do think that it's going to start to create a really active and exciting view from the neighborhoods around us. Now, another thing that we're studying is potentially the integration of photovoltaic panels at this position. This is going to be a LEED Platinum building where we feel really excited about the potential of that and how we could express that perhaps in the form. Excuse me. So in this version, we're exploring really putting them where we think they're going to do the most good, which is high in the building, facing south and west. So we think it can both increase the reading of our form and potentially start to express a lot of that sustainability mission of the project. So these are just some, not from anywhere in particular, someone's rooftop deck here in this part of town. So you start to get a sense of both the change in plane and the change in texture can start to create a really active and we think a really exciting graphically facade. Another option we're thinking of is actually using the panels to create the patterning in the building. You'll notice that it comes down essentially to the MR5 height. We're really aware of, you're not seeing it here, but we're really aware of 80 Webster, our neighbor. We certainly don't want to create any glare issues, create any issues for them. We also, of course, realize that that's where the sun is. It's going to be blocked by our neighbor building. So that explains kind of why that stops there. And this is our combined facade on Columbia. Of course, everyone knows this isn't really a view that will be achievable in real life unless there's an awful lot of demolition. But we wanted to be able to get back and really see the entire composition. So I think what you'll notice is that we have set back the slot building. We think that was a great idea and a really great move to create that separation between the masses. We're also looking at, taking out that horizontal, which was suggested, to create really maybe more of a middle in that base, middle top expression. And you'll see that sort of that column coming down here starts to reset the rhythm and essentially opens up this corner here. So we thought that was a really interesting take, and I think it's improved the look. So just quickly to public realm, and if Ian is on the call, I'm not sure.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, David. Yeah, so as it relates to the public realm, we really had 3 comments that we heard last time. There was a comment about maximizing the landscape frontage along the streetscape. We had a comment about the complete street section, particularly along Columbia North. And then there was a comment regarding the width of the Webster Ave streetscape. So next slide. So this one gets at that first comment about the amount and extent of the landscape along the street. So what you have at the top of the screen is a plan enlargement of Columbia North that straddles the HR and the MR5. And what we're demonstrating here is that we've got our street trees spaced at 40 feet on center. And adjacent to each of those trees, we have 25-foot wide planting strips. So, we're really trying to have a very robust landscape component along all sides of the development. And the diagram that's on the lower right, it's kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. But basically what it says is through our approximately 700 linear feet of frontage that wraps 3 sides of the development, about 285 or 40% of that frontage is going to be vegetated. And so we think that's a really good striking of a balance between the amount of landscaping, having a green public realm, while maintaining the appropriate amount of sort of porosity at the back of curb, because we are in an urban condition and we want to be able to have people pass through that curb edge and not have a continuous landscape buffer. The images in the middle give an indication of some examples of the types and diversity of planting that we are envisioning for that understory layer that would be within those 25-foot wide planting strips. We know the city's got a native plant policy that they've recently adopted, which we will comply with. And I think you'll see that we're really trying to embrace a range of textures, colors, and size of materials so that we're really not proposing any type of a monoculture. We want a more biodiverse sort of ground level planting design. And then the small image to the left is an indication of the tree species. So what you see in the smallest image is the day 1 tree size. We're proposing to have 3-inch caliper trees. Those will come in day 1 at about 18-inch or 18-foot height. We think within about 5 years' time, they'll get to about 25-foot height and be between 5 and 6-inch caliper. And then ultimately under ideal growing conditions, those trees will mature to be somewhere in the range of 35 to 45 feet in height and have a 30-foot diameter canopy. So really a good shade covering element there. And the next slide. So the comment about the complete street section, this is a analysis of Columbia North. So the plan to the left is the enlargement that shows our 18-foot wide sidewalk, which complies with all the applicable zoning components for the public realm in terms of the pedestrian zone, the furnishing zone, the amount of green, and the curb edge. You can see the existing red lines that go up and down on the screen. Those are the existing right-of-way lines and the existing curbs, which are remaining in place. The condition right now is that that curb-to-curb dimension is about a 26.5-foot curb-to-curb width. And so within that cross-section, it's really more of a sort of a share-out condition in terms of the bike and vehicular use. That's an existing condition that the project will not be altering. We know that there's larger mobility related discussions that are happening, and we're happy to participate in those, but altering that existing street section is sort of beyond the scope of our project because we do comply with what we need to do in terms of our side of the project for the zoning. Next slide. And then the last comment we had was about the Webster Ave sidewalk width. So the images to the left show what the sidewalk condition is in front of the existing 80 Webster condo buildings. Right now, they have slightly less than 6 foot wide at its narrowest pedestrian zone in front of the building, and that's because there's existing utility poles there. Our project will be removing those utility poles, and in doing so, we'll be creating a width that's between 7 and 8 feet wide clear from the curb to the existing planter along the building. There's no existing vegetation at the back of curb in front of the condo buildings. The image to the right is our proposed cross section in front of the MR5. For the MR5, the zoning dictates that we need to have at least a 12-foot wide total width sidewalk. Our section is 14 feet wide. Within that, we need to have at least a 6-foot wide pedestrian zone and a 6-foot wide furnishing / green zone, which we comply with. So that's our cross section. It meets with the zoning. We think it works in terms of the scale of the MR5 and is a good balance between having that minimum 6-foot pedestrian width, but also having an adequate amount of green, as we mentioned before, really trying to have a green streetscape all around the project. So we feel pretty good about the scale of that in terms of the cross-sectional dimensions for that. I believe that's the last landscape slide.
And that's our presentation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the presentation and the improvements that have been made. It's clear there's been a considerable amount of work over the last couple weeks. And just to reiterate, I appreciate the project overall. Clearly, this is delivering on the Union Square neighborhood plan has set a clear goal to create an employment center in this area. And this is delivering on that and delivering improvements to an area, significantly underutilized area today. I still do have several concerns, though, related to the project's compliance with design guidelines and zoning requirements. And so I'd like to go through those. The first have to do with circulation and street design, the public realm, and then the second part has to do with architectural, the building architecture. I appreciate you including the street sections that include Columbia Street North, Columbia Street East, which is the is it East? Yeah, East, which is the majority of the street frontage is not included, but I assume it's a similar overall section with 18-foot sidewalk width and similar street width. I think what you're doing at sidewalk level is great between the curb and the building edge. But the section through the street highlights what is really the challenge here, which is how to create a complete street and within the existing right-of-way. I understand that this project intends to kind of take improvements to the curb, but I think it is the responsibility of this project to improve the street, to create a real gateway into Boynton Yards. This is the only access point from points west, from Webster Street, from points west, which is really the majority of Somerville. The Boynton Yards overlay district zoning, the thoroughfare, there's a chart that designates Columbia Street North as a thoroughfare. And for the commercial street thoroughfare type, zoning requires that the street include bicycle lanes in each direction. So beyond Sharrow's lanes. And I think that's going to require some adjustments to the curb location to accommodate that. So I think what really needs to happen is the city needs to provide direction on what this street section should be. The curb should be set accordingly, and work should be outboard from that. Another concern is, so there is no parallel parking on either one of these streets, which by itself is fine. But there's also doesn't appear to be a drop-off area. And certainly for a building of this scale, I'd anticipate there's going to be significant rideshare traffic. There's going to be short-term deliveries. There's going to be Amazon vans pulling up, UPS vans pulling up. That wouldn't necessarily use the full-fledged loading dock. So that may be something you've thought about, but I think we haven't really discussed it yet. I'm concerned about, in terms of creating a complete street, providing space for that type of activity to happen outside of the street right away. The vehicular circulation area is important. One thing that struck me when looking at the plan that you had showed earlier is that there'd be the potential to use the existing Beach Street as kind of a through street, both for rideshare drop-off, deliveries, whatever. It could even be a through street for truck traffic, which I think would be a concern. So that the parking entrance through and passing under the building. I wasn't sure if that was the intent, but I think that would, perhaps that would certainly impact the character of the public realm on that side of the building. And if there's loading traffic that's intended to pass through there, that could be a concern. And then the loading.
I'm sorry, all the loading is intended to come off Columbia. And in our conversations with the mobility group, we definitely went through that. They're concerned about right turning trucks into from Webster Ave. So Webster Ave is really just pedestrian cars, and for the legal access of the 80 Webster folks who have it. But all the loading happens off of Columbia, and it is not intended as a through street for trucks. And it's not even actually a street. It's an access easement.
Okay. Will there be through access for cars?
For the cars that we're obligated to have it for, yes, but it's not intended to be that.
Okay, so for a ride share, if you're coming in Uber, would the Uber make the right off of Webster and drop off back in this area?
That's an interesting question. I think maybe Ian can answer better than I can. I don't know if part of that, part of the street section, which would be intended for parking, could be used as that, but certainly not Beach Ave, former Beach Ave.
Okay.
If I might jump in, I think it's important to keep in mind that the thoroughfare improvements to Columbia or Archibald Quarry Way are currently being planned with the 495 Columbia curb as sort of a base point, so that the D3 development parcel, I think the adjustments to accommodate the thoroughfare requirements through the mobility department and the development people will be working towards accommodating some of the uses, the drop-offs, the bike lanes, just that's sort of an active process going on separate from this development parcel.
So if Columbia Street is widened, it will widen exclusively to the north into the D3 parcel to accommodate
I
bike.
think that is an option.
Okay. Okay.
If I could, this is Jennifer Schultz, and the permitting attorney for this. And this is just a topic that we've discussed with engineering and Dan Bartman quite a bit, where I think there would actually have to be a taking by the city in order to push the curb line even further in. And there does not appear to be any interest or appetite for that to happen. And so, like Rebecca just pointed out, what we have been instructed is to take the curb line as it exists, and then we've pulled our proposed project back in order to have the 18-foot sidewalk, but that we have been told that those are the conditions that we are expected to work within.
Okay. Thank you. And just one more concern about circulation is the area in the loading zone, the passage under the building. I do think it's really inevitable that there's going to be pedestrian circulation through there. There's the creation of this open space in between 80 Webster and the building, a clear visual connection through from Webster Street. And I think there needs to be additional definition there, thinking about how that pedestrian circulation happens and conflicts with vehicles are avoided. There is a section in zoning that defines guidelines for a mid-block passage, and it talks about a 10-foot wide area designated for pedestrians. I don't know if that's the right solution, but that could be a starting point for better defining an area for pedestrians through the passage. On the building architecture, I think there's, and I'm really excited about the ground floor streetscape along Columbia Street North. That seems to be the addition of several doors along that facade, creation of an active streetscape. I do think, to the extent that public serving uses can be provided on the ground floor, that's really going to be the key to activating that street, not just building program along that street, but having retail that's open to the public. I wasn't sure if the intent with the cafe connecting to the lobby was that was a public serving cafe, and thus the public would have access to the lobby as well.
That is the case. That is the case.
Okay, well, that's great. That's great to hear. Zoning does require 70% of the ground floor, the 70% minimum of the ground floor be fenestration for a building of this type. And I think clearly that's being accomplished on the north side of the high-rise building, the east, but for the southern portion, for the majority of the Columbia Street facade and the southern portion, it's a solid wall, and it seems to be kind of being treated as a loading side of the building or service side of the building. And I'm not sure that's the right way to treat that street. And perhaps, the solution there is to rethink how the ground floor is being organized there. I know the majority of the southern portion of the building are service uses for the building, some of which possibly could move down to the parking level, some of which could move up. One thought, perhaps you have the transformer vault facing out onto the street. There's the bike parking facing in towards 80 Webster. Maybe there's the potential to switch those. Put the bike parking with a open active storefront facing out on the street instead of the adjacent residential building. And then really,
I think the plan that we started with was really the touchstone for us, is that in order for this building to function, in order for this part of the building we're looking at now to be utterly free of service and to be utterly active and lit and have no truck traffic on it, we really made it a pretty conscious decision to put the loading back further. So it seems like to us, it would be very difficult to mix those functionalities and still achieve this kind of active from corner to corner street activity. And then second point, is that our neighbors at 80 Webster, we've been also very concerned about what they see. So I think having the bike room on that side and having building amenities on that side has been very important to us. We almost see that as another face, sort of whatever is facing them. So it's been a bit of a balancing act. I appreciate what you're saying, which is I think why we really tried to do what we thought we could, which was to green that wall, was to use what could be a blank wall against a loading and treat that as yet another expression kind of our kind of green ethos that we're trying to project here. So it was definitely challenging.
Yeah, no, I certainly respect that, especially given the small footprint of the building and needing to accommodate, what a building of this size requires for service uses.
Yeah.
On the floor.
Yeah, especially at the lab typology too. There's a significant amount of ground floor use. I'm sure, as you understand.
Yeah, and then balancing that with the requirement of zoning, which is that 70% fenestration. And I think, part of the job of this commission is to kind of highlight those guidelines and how they're being accomplished. So I guess I'm highlighting it in that spirit.
Okay.
One other item is at grade, and again, this is kind of a more detailed comment, but there's a design guideline 14.6 requires that vents exhausts should be located to minimize adverse effects on pedestrian comfort. I know that's a more detailed comment, but one of the things I'd like to just make sure that's included in our recommendations as an urban design commission to the planning board is that be detailed when this is presented to the planning board. And that to the extent possible, exhaust for parking, for the loading dock, for the transformer valve be up through the roof and not out the side of the building, especially adjacent to the residential building next door. Another kind of more detailed comment is design guideline 14.11, which requires that storefront and lobby entrances should have awnings and canopies. I did see what I thought perhaps were canopies at the entrances of the low-rise building. Yes, yeah. So that's great to see. I didn't see that at the high-rise building, and I think that's something that should be considered as well. That may be, especially because there's no upper story setback along the north side, potential for wind impacts at the pedestrian realm. I think that's something that perhaps might come out once you do the wind study, which I know will be required as you go forward. Canopies perhaps could be designed in consideration of that.
Yes, I think you're right about that. We are working currently with our wind study group, and that is something that we're going to have to start detailing in. So, point well taken.
Okay. So for the west wall, I appreciate the additional studies that you've done. I think there's starting to be some ideas about pulling separating the mass from the adjacent two facades is starting to feel like it's distinguishing this piece more from the rest of the building. But I'm still concerned overall about the size of it, its proximity to the open space, its relationship to the other building volumes, and its overall width. Again, just looking at what zoning requires, there's a facade composition requirement that explicitly stipulates that there's a 20-foot wide maximum blank wall on the upper stories. And I'm concerned that this is not compliant with that.
But it actually, I think it defines that by on a facade, and a facade is further defined as being on a major street or on a civic space. So I think since it's not a facade per se, just code wise, I don't believe that requirement is in place.
That may be the case if this is not technically considered a facade.
Yeah, I realize it's a technicality, but just
Yep.
in terms of that particular rule, that was certainly something we were worried about.
Yeah.
Right, of course. So
Yeah. But I guess beyond just the kind of the specific requirement of it, and I wouldn't be married to the 20-foot requirement, even if it was the case that this was a facade. I'm wondering if there's the possibility to reorganize the internal program to reduce the width of the blank wall. Perhaps there's the opportunity. I know there's elevators, the back of elevators. I think in the first presentation you showed facing this wall, but it seems like an awful long width. Is there's the potential to put a stair against that wall, and then that creates additional opportunity for opening up the wall or definition on this side. I think given the size of it, it still feels like a back. It's also
as far as adding the stairs, I mean, we're trying to be as efficient as possible with our core, and I hope, I'm sure you appreciate just trying to increase the efficiency of it. Means that we've made it as dense as possible and as small as we can make it. So it presents as little as a face as possible to the side. So I don't think that we can achieve that per se, but I do think that, looking at this from, you're never really going to look at it straight on like this. I think from the angles that we were showing, I think it really does, in a sense, from the northeast, it will start to hide behind that more prominent piece of the facade. And I think from other oblique angles, it will start to compress. So, I do think that, we feel like we've done our best to take something that's absolute necessity and try to, turn it into a design feature.
Yeah, well, I think there's a balance between, the optimum layout for efficiency and its impact on the facade design of the building. I think it's headed, the additional architect, and it's tough to see from this difference, but angle. But I think starting to introduce depth and perhaps some of the patterning of the adjacent facade, seems to well, maybe we can come back to that. I'd be interested to hear what my colleagues have to say about that as well. So I got two more items. This lobby design. I think it's great to hear how you thought about the programming of the lobby, the connection between the cafe space, the active lobby entrance space. Good to hear that there'll be public access in that. But looking at the ground floor plan that you showed, I guess I understood for the first time, perhaps, the extent of the lobby along Webster Street, that it's really taken up the whole frontage along Webster.
Yeah, this is something that we're still working on. Just what the character of that lobby is, just how, and it really has to do with the balance between that sort of active use notion, how we're showing it as big as we can make it right now. Of course, there can be trade-offs if we want to change the shape of this lobby, if we want to push more sort of active use onto Webster, we can think about that as well. This is just really just a starting place for that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's the direction that I'd hope it would go in, is to have more active use along there, whether it is small retail space, whether it is arts and creative space, studio space along the street, or something like that. The concern would be that the lobby would essentially be just a dead space, given that it's a secondary lobby. If there's going to be a front desk, it's probably going to be in the main lobby. There's not going to be someone sitting there. It'll essentially be a pass-through space.
Right, certainly.
and-
Yeah, I think we agree that the lobby needs further development, and we need a better understanding of how it's going to fit into the active use.
Just going back to the design guidelines again, design guideline 13, it notes that lobbies should be limited in both width and total area to preserve floor space and frontage for other ground story uses. I think that's a concern along Webster. At least for me, if there's an active use for the cafe connected into the lobby and that there's public access into both of those, I'd recommend we provide or recommend flexibility that guideline's being accomplished for the main lobby space. I guess the last item is mechanical penthouse. I appreciate the addition of, starting to think about the addition of solar panels on the south and perhaps the east side. Knowing that the form of that will continue to evolve as you study the solar orientation. But the transition between the north wall along Columbia Street North and the penthouse above seems unresolved to me. Yeah, if you can go to that, go back one. Yeah, this one. And so maybe you can help just clarify the materiality. It looks like in the typical facade, there's a combination of vision glass, spandrel glass, and perhaps metal panels, both of the bands and the solid portions, kind of vertical pieces glazed into the curtain wall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the mechanical penthouse along the north. So along the east side, there's a clear difference between the occupied floors and the penthouse above, kind of as that corner mass locks in. But along the north side, at least it appears that the penthouse is in plane with the wall below, made of a textured concrete panel. And so that seems unresolved to me. The combination of having the metal below the kind of more solid concrete mass, but then also having them be in plane. I feel like either there wants to be a separation of plane and a difference in material, or there wants to be, if they are in plane, kind of a continuity of that facade all the way up to the top.
Yeah, the difference in material is something that we're currently still studying, but I think what we've tried to do, you might see in this drawing, is we're trying to create by scoring and by creating this similar graining to what is in the facade and kind of bringing that up and trying to lock them in visually, and also create a lot more texture as you see it from a distance. So yeah, we're certainly aware. I think part of solving for the west wall was bringing that penthouse out to this sharper corner. So that's been part of our study is to get more texture into that penthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, actually, this is John Sullivan. I'm one of David's colleagues. Just to add on that element, we like the form. We do like the clarity and strength of the form along the corner with the alignment. But I appreciate what you just said about the about the patterning of the material and how it can maybe pick up on the rhythm from what's happening below. And I do think with some of that solid material, you could organize it in a way where it allowed those vertical elements to tie into it, so it felt like it was one unified piece. And I think at the detail level, we could certainly solve for that.
Well, thank you. I'm finished. I'll pass on to my colleagues now.
Okay. So, Tim, I agree with most of your comments, if not all of them. So I'm going to add a few other things because I think you did cover a lot of territory. To start off with the public realm, I really appreciate the development that you've done for the street. I'm much more convinced today than I was the last time we met with the the success of the north facade especially. And I'm wondering, I think to address Tim's comment about what is a green wall along the Columbia East, and sort of what that landscape is like. So it's going to be similar, carry the rhythm of trees and the lower story planting. Is that the idea for that? Because I think that idea could transform a little bit to make places for people to be, so it's a little different than what's trying to be accomplished along the north face, where you want people to be focusing. People are coming and going there. You want some porousness so you can see from the street into the retail or the active, I should say the active commercial space. Whereas when you come to the east side, maybe that could be like a very narrow park or something. So I'm wondering if it should, still have that, some of the elements that continue across there, some of the rhythms, but maybe creating some places of repose, along it, and marrying what that green wall is with the logic of the landscape that you have there. So.
Sure. I mean, we do have the same elements that wrap around. I think what changes once you go from Columbia North to Columbia East is those planting beds change in proportion.
Mm-hmm.
They do create little subspaces. We do have our benches that sort of integrate into the planting. So I think there's opportunities there where we can maybe place them closer to the planting and create little eddies for people to kind of gather and sit. And then I think in conjunction with the green wall on the eastern facade, I think that whole experience is going to feel more verdant and more sort of green, I think, than perhaps on the other sides.
Right. So that's great. That's the sort of direction I was hoping this would be going. And so you are also doing the landscape for the green wall.
Yes.
That'll be conceptually integrated. That's great.
Yes.
While we're looking at, I think that's all moved in a very good direction. In terms of the north facade and that two-story, I'm curious what's on the second level of, especially the 495 building, because that, at least, I think stepping back from the building, it would be nice if that had a relationship with the lower level. It had a different, and so I'm curious what the program is for that space.
The program is intended to be laboratory use. But a laboratory tenant will have office space as well as benching and so forth. So it's to be determined, and it will be dependent on the tenant, of course, but this will be occupied tenant space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's even on the corner.
Well, we're certainly doing test fits, and I think a lot of times that is envisioned as an office or conference area within an office.
Yeah. It would be, having some continuity between those two floors. I think feels important, if it's nothing more than sort of lighting standards or something for that space, there's something that unifies it, because, I think it could, this whole, the double story expression at the base, I think, be sort of contradicted depending on how that second level is developed. So I know it's almost not in our purview but it doesn't, but you captured it as a part of public realm. And so I do think there should be, something, that there's some thought to how that develops, or what standards could be applied to that area. And if, maybe it's exterior lighting or something, there's something that continues to reinforce that double height expression. Then the other comment I have is, our comments are about the, what facade is that? The west facade, and that solid area. I feel like that's the one. So I think the facades have really come along. I think there is a sort of a rigor to them that makes a lot of sense to me. I think I understand you know, the penthouse, so that's a high density panels, right? Something like a Swiss Pearl or a tactile panel that you're proposing for the penthouse.
Yeah.
And that's also being woven through the facade below it, correct?
No, that's metal panel.
All of it's
Yeah.
metal panel.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
except for the
interesting.
base. The base is the base. We are reintroducing that tactile material into the base. So when you see the base, you'll see that sort of finer texture, you know, where the pedestrians are.
Oh, so that is all metal panel.
So I think the penthouse is
Yeah.
the concrete, the facade is the metal panel.
Correct.
Okay, for some reason, the way it's rendered, it looked to me like that buff colored textured, you know, panel was also weaving through.
Yeah, I
Which,
mean, I think
it's
part of
curtain wall.
is to integrate that in certain terms of the tonality. So I think
Mhm.
we will be working in those color palettes. That's to be determined still, but
Yeah.
it should be that a lighter feeling metal.
Yeah. It would be difficult to actually use the high density concrete panels though in those locations. Because it's not only the color, that's not only the tone of it, but it's also the, you know, the reflectivity of it. So those concrete panels, you know, really sort of absorb light as opposed to reflect light. And I think it'll read very differently. You know, it will be very distinct. Anyway, I mean, technically, is that a difficult thing to do?
I don't.
Actually
It's
weave
not
it through?
impossible. I think it's. I don't think it's really our vision for that. I think we definitely want to advance. Sort of. That's not really how we imagine. We really imagine the core wall having that material and then coming up and over, and that was our original notion of how we lock those together.
So is the core wall of that material?
Yes.
So it is. It's the light.
We're still imagining that.
Because it looks very distinct. It's
a little gray tone, but yeah, it's that's how we're imagining it. And using a variety of textures, there's a variety of textures and patterning and essentially ribbing that you can use to sort of create a lot of visual variety, and especially the way the sun hits it.
Yeah. That is, so I think this is the one part of the facade that's not very successful. You know, I think again, there's sort of a rigorous order. You know, there's offsets, but they're very organized in their offsets. And this is just a random, you know, how would you call it? Composition of different materials. And I feel like that doesn't make sense to me. It's still carrying across sort of the datums, but you know, so it feels like neither here nor there. And I think the random, I wish you could use find some kind of rigor to it. I really appreciate the idea of trying to get shadow in this. And I also am intrigued by the idea of incorporating the photovoltaic surfaces in there. And what is that? Is the product you're looking at? Would that be sort of like a glass photovoltaic surface?
Yeah,
you know,
it would be the wafer product, silicon wafer.
Yeah.
We're working with our consultants now to try to optimize the angle and to understand how we install it and if it should be angled within that wall. So I mean, I think we're excited about it. Thinking about it in terms of texture as well as color.
I think that could be really interesting and meaningful also to increase the amount of surface. And yeah, I was actually thinking it could be like what do you call it? Like louvered, shingled on the surface, and provide either shingled horizontally or vertically so that, it was optimized for its orientation. It created pattern because of the logic of collecting light. So I think it could be much more than it is right now, right? It just feels like a little bit of a throwaway composition given, how much thought I think went into the composition of all the other facades. So I'm really intrigued by the potential for the photovoltaics in this area. And that is the end of my comments.
My colleagues have said everything that needs to be said. I have no other comments. You guys hit on all the points that I was thinking about, and I agree with everything. And I think that as far as the design team is able to comply with the zoning regulations, that's going to be really important. But I appreciate my colleagues' comments, and I literally don't have anything more to say.
All right, thank you. So seeing that there are no additional comments from the commission, do we have a motion for a preferred massing option?
So we'll be taking 3 votes tonight. One is
One will be for the preferred massing option. The second one will be a vote for a preferred schematic facade design option, or if this is some sort of modified option, I think that's, you can vote on it being a modified option. And you will be voting on the high-rise, if this project meets the high-rise district design guidelines, that those are being satisfied. And then your typical vote to recommend your additional guidance and modifications that you've identified tonight.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I thought the massing was voted on in the last session.
Yeah.
The notes that I received from Dan is that you did not take an official vote on the massing option. You just voted to continue the project with the guidance that the massing option 1 was what you wanted to see further developed.
Okay, so we need to vote on
A preferred massing option.
yeah, which would be massing 1 is the one that the direction we've been heading, right?
Right.
Correct.
So I so move.
I second.
A roll call vote. Do you guys, sorry, apologies for this being my first time chairing this meeting. Are you guys the one that say that you're the full motion for preferred massing option 1? Or is that
Yes.
That's it.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So, okay. We have a motion for preferred massing option 1. Roll call vote. Deborah Finnick,
Yes.
Tim Talon,
yes.
Heidi Cron.
Yes.
Shall be noted, there are 3 votes yes for preferred massing option 1. Do we have a motion for a preferred schematic facade design option?
What were Dan's notes on that one?
He wasn't quite sure if this was a hybrid option at this point. If I'm looking through some of the past presentations from the applicant, I think there was an alternate 1 and alternate 2.
Yeah.
I believe alternate 1, or perhaps the applicant can remind the commission about the 2 schematic facade options 1 and 2.
The alternate 1 was similar to this option, but it had frame elements within the body of this piece of the facade. And option 3 did not have a frame language, but more straight vertical option, vertical metal panel. This is essentially this is our preferred option with some elements of option 3.
Yeah, if I recall, that's what we asked you to develop the last time. So I think in terms of facade options, I don't think except for the comments that we made today, I don't think that there's any other options, that this is the option, and that we were just asked to see a evolution of the comments that we made today.
So I think the motion is for a modified option that you're seeing tonight.
Yeah, I think, I'm personally, I'm comfortable designating this as the preferred facade option.
Yeah.
Incorporating the recommendations that were made tonight and further development in response to that.
All right, so do we have a motion for a preferred modified schematic facade design option?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Talon,
Yes.
Heidi Cron.
Yes.
Commission moves 3 votes yes for the preferred modified schematic design option. Do we have a motion that the high-rise district design guidelines are satisfied?
So on this one, I mean, I think it is important that the project moves forward through the process. I know there's another neighborhood meeting that'll need to be held, and then the actual decision-making body, the planning board, will have its own review of the project. So I guess for me, I'd like to take a vote on this tonight, but I would vote no for satisfying all of the HR district design guidelines. And again, that's a recommendation that'll go to the planning board. Just gives them a framework for their further review of the project.
Do we have a second to motion for a vote on the high-rise district design guideline satisfaction?
Tim, could you highlight which ones, the lobby? I remember the Webster Street lobby was one of them.
Yeah, I think the Webster Street lobby, I still have some concerns. I appreciate the discussion about the penthouse, the distinction between the concrete and the metal. I still have concerns about that. We didn't get into it. There's a specific guideline that, what does it say? Guideline 14.8.4, which notes that materials appearing heavier in weight should be used below wall materials appearing lighter in weight. Again, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility for interpretation there, but locating a concrete volume above the glass and metal, I think there's a way to do it and perhaps satisfy that design guideline, but I'm not convinced it's there yet. The awnings and canopy requirements.
Yep.
The at-grade exhaust. Again, this could be one that will be satisfied, but I think it just hasn't been demonstrated yet. And then the complete streets as well.
Okay, that was helpful. So I second. Heidi, did you already second the motion? Okay.
No.
Rebecca, Jennifer Schultz. I'm just a little uncomfortable with some of the statements that relate to zoning compliance, which of course is directly in the purview of the planning board. And I just would like a clarification maybe before the vote is taken, whether the board is voting and taking a position that the project is not zoning compliant from a design standpoint, where the proponent's position is that all of those guidelines will be complied with, that either they weren't shown tonight or, you know, we weren't just immediately able to follow Tim's comments, but we welcome the opportunity to see the written recommendations so that we can ensure compliance. And I just want to make sure that it doesn't seem like we're presenting a zoning non-compliant, you know, flippant project, zoning be damned. Because certainly our intention is, other than the special permit required to have the overlay height attributed to the project, the remainder of the project intends to be fully zoning compliant, including the design guidelines. So I did at least just want to say that we appreciate it and we will comply. And I understand, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. But I did just want to make sure that it was clear what was being voted here. Thank you, everyone. I thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, hi, this is Rebecca Cooper speaking, senior planner with OSPCD, and as noted, I'm sitting in for Director Sarah Lewis. To that point specifically, as Member Talon pointed out, the planning board will, of course, offer their feedback on the on their own feedback and input on the process. It is very clear in the process that when the project comes out of this, they will receive the written recommendation, and yes, you will have the opportunity to amend the project further as you go through the process and prepare for the second neighborhood meeting. Obviously, all compliance issues will have to be handled. All strict compliance issues will have to be handled before the final site plan approval application is submitted to the Office of Planning and Zoning. So yes, the recommendation will be provided and the project will have the scope to work toward compliance following the recommendations offered this evening.
So do we have, so is our, what do you call it, our vote appropriate?
I would say, sorry, Rebecca speaking again, you are offering your feedback that there still needs to be some work to bring the project into your view of the architectural guidelines. I have notes on the specific guidelines that you're highlighting for the team to pay particular attention to that will be recorded in the recommendation as guidelines that you feel should be highlighted for the team and will be folded into the written recommendation.
Yeah, and this is Courtney Kirk from Public Space Urban Forestry. You have in your recommendations and reviewing this project, you can vote no, that this project does not meet the high-rise district design guidelines, if that is how you are feeling in terms of reviewing this project. Is everyone clear? Any other questions?
And I think just to clarify, again, my own position, I think given where, you know, this process, the Urban Design Commission's review of a project falls in the overall design process, I think it's understood that the design is in progress and it's continuing to evolve and will continue to evolve in response to other feedback that you get from neighbors, from community meetings as well. Ultimately, this is a recommendation based on kind of where the design is at now, but understood that the planning board will ultimately, you know, evaluate the final design and make the decision, their own decision.
All right, so then do we have a motion that the high-rise design district guidelines are satisfied? I think we can, if you are all saying that this does not meet the design guidelines, I believe you can motion that this does not meet the design guidelines.
Yeah, and that was that was your motion, right? It does not at this stage meet design. The stage of design does not meet the design guidelines.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see here. This is where it's tricky. So I think the vote or the motion has been made that you're going to take a vote on the high-rise district design guidelines being satisfied, and you can vote yes or no. Roll call vote. Deborah Finnick.
To Tim's motion that it does not meet the design guidelines at this point in the design process. Is that correct, Tim?
Hi. Hi, it's Rebecca speaking again. Just for procedurally, the way you'll do it is, so the motion for the vote is that the design guidelines are met. So you're proceeding to the vote, and then Tim's vote is no. Anyone else's vote would be either yes or no on whether it's met. Does that clarify it for you a little bit?
It does indeed. Thank you.
Maybe I'll restate my motion.
You want to
I want
restate?
to restate my motion. Motion that the design guidelines are met.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Deborah Finnick.
Yes.
Tim Talon.
No.
Heidi Cron.
Yes.
The vote shall be recorded that there are 2 votes that the project meets the high-rise district design guidelines and 1 vote that it does not. Do we have a motion to recommend the commission's additional guidance and modifications identified this evening?
I'm confused. I thought we were voting that, I'm sorry. I was confused. I thought Tim said they do meet the high-rise guidelines, and then we did a roll call vote and you said no. I'm a little bit confused, what we just voted on. The motion, sorry, this is Rebecca speaking again. The motion and the second can be separate from how the vote carries out. Okay.
The motion was that the guidelines are met. So the motion and the second enabled the voting to happen. And then
Okay.
everybody's able to vote how they feel on that motion specifically. And those were 2 votes that the guidelines are met and 1 vote that the guidelines are not met. We can revisit that vote if you're uncomfortable with your vote, or we can move on at this point.
No, I'm good. It was just the first time that that had happened. So, but I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to redo my vote.
Great. Let's call that again.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
No, I don't mind at all.
All right.
I think, yeah, go for it. Go.
All right. Do we have a motion that the high-rise district design guidelines are satisfied?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Deborah Finnick.
No.
Tim Talon.
No.
Heidi Cron.
No.
It shall be recorded that there are 3 votes no, that this project does not meet the high-rise district design guidelines at this time. All right, we got that under our belt.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion to recommend the commission's additional guidance and modifications identified this evening?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Deborah Finnick.
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
Heidi Cron.
Yes.
Shall be recorded unanimous vote that for a motion to recommend the commission's additional guidance and modifications identified this evening. Those are all the votes for 495 Columbia.
Rebecca, could you clarify for the team what this means now? Is the UDC finished reviewing this project? Are they going to prepare the written recommendations? Can we proceed forward to our second neighborhood meeting? Sorry, that was a run-on sentence. All of those questions.
So the next steps, this is Rebecca speaking. The next steps for this project will be that, yes, the vote was held tonight. The project can proceed. There will be a written recommendation that will be provided. After that's provided to the team, you'll be able to schedule your second neighborhood meeting.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that's all the business we have for tonight. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Talon,
Yes.
Heidi Cron.
Yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Okay,
night.
thank you. Bye. Thanks.
Have a great evening.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.